Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little intake and also put another person's intake within this video because, once again, I like to sometimes within my videos, or actually a lot of the times, kind of kill two birds with that one stone, or even potentially a few birds with one stone. Because not only am I going to bring up my point of view, but I'm also going to bring up another point of view and one of the more interesting opinions, of course, that is usually always shared within that of boxing, or one of the more colorful commentators, or one of the more, in my view, interesting commentators within that of boxing, of course, is Mr. Paulie Malignaggi. And Paulie Malignaggi, of course, for those of you that are not aware of his career or, did not know much about him, he, of course, was a legitimate two-weight division champion within that of professional boxing at the 140-pound division, at the junior welterweight class, or at the super lightweight class, and of course at the welterweight class at 147 pounds. So Paulie, of course, he likes to commentate. I think that he is a relatively good to great commentator, and I think that a lot of the times he brings up a lot of great points. Does that mean that I agree with everything that he's going to state about everything? No, not necessarily. But at the end of the day, Paulie, he brought up some points that I thought were very particularly interesting about the Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol fight. And of course, a certain amount of people are taking a look at this fight and they're stating, of course, pretty much what a lot of casual fans do and what a lot of people, pretty much do after every single boxing fight or after a certain fight when it doesn't go the way that they thought that it should have or the way that they wanted it to. They, of course, cry and scream robbery. In my view, was this fight a robbery because it went to Artur Beterbiev? No, it wasn't. And once again, I'm just going to state this. I watched this fight two times. I watched it the first time live. I had Beterbiev winning 7 rounds to 5. And the second time I had it a little bit different, but I still had Artur Beterbiev winning it 7 rounds to 5. I thought that Beterbiev took over the second half of the fight. I thought that Bivol was pretty phenomenal or pretty good, or at least got the majority of the best shots in throughout the first 4 rounds. And I think by about round 5 onwards, I started thinking that Artur Beterbiev was starting to take over a little bit. And when I rewatched the fight, I pretty much scored it the exact same, at least within that of the middle rounds. But Paulie Malignaggi actually is going to bring up some very good points here. And some of the points also that some of you guys, some of my very great commentators, which I very well thank you guys for pretty much tuning into my videos for those of you that do. But some of you also brought up the point that you guys thought that Dmitry Bivol, that he was the more accurate puncher of the two, and that he got in the cleaner shots. And what I will state is this. In my personal view and spots, I agree. And when you talk about who was the more accurate puncher and who oftentimes got in more cleaner shots, it was Mr. Dmitry Bivol. But this fight, because I wanted to talk about it, this fight reminds me actually of a very great technical fight that ended up happening many years ago. And for those of you that, have been watching boxing now for the past 10 plus years at the very least, or maybe the past 15 years, of course, you remember the fight that ended up happening all the way back in 2014 with that of Saul Canelo Alvarez and Mr. Araceli Lara. When Canelo Alvarez, when he was just kind of coming off of the victory over Alfredo Ngulu, but also a little bit fresh off the loss of Floyd Mayweather, and a lot of people were wondering how he was going to look against, at the time, the most dangerous contender in that weight class, other than, of course, himself, Mr. Canelo, against Mr. Araceli Lara, who was a part of the Cuban boxing school, who was coming off of wins over Alfredo Ngulu, a stoppage victory, I believe, and, of course, a very dominant victory over that of Austin Trout. And that fight ended up happening. In my view, this fight was almost exactly like that of the Canelo Alvarez versus Araceli Lara fight, to where a lot of people, of course, they claim robbery, that Canelo Alvarez won that fight, but in all reality, that fight really was not a robbery. Now, I'm going to compare it to that fight because, to be quite honest with you, I think that it's really exactly like that fight in so many different ways. But we're going to talk about that as it goes along. Anyways, let's hear what Paulie Malignaggi has to say, and you're going to hear my personal viewpoint and my analytical breakdown of why I compare it to that fight and why certain factors are, in my view, of why I compare it to that fight. But let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. Paulie, has to say.
What's up, guys? Paulie Malignaggi of Paulie TV. Artur Beterbiev wins a majority decision over Dmitry Bivol and is now the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. I don't know what everybody else thought about this fight. I was working it. I was actually doing a live with Paulie TV during the fight. Me and champ Chris Algieri, we felt pretty strongly that Dmitry Bivol was winning the fight. It was there was moments that Artur Beterbiev had. There were moments when he made it uncomfortable, and he won plenty of rounds himself. But it just didn't seem like he was doing consistent enough work. He was coming forward as he did have a slow start. There were moments when he did get Bivol on his bike a little bit, but overall, Bivol off his movement was the more accurate guy. He put together punches and salvos.
What I'm going to state is this very quickly, because when some of my commentators, and as well Mr. Paulie Malignaggi here, when he stated that Dmitry Bivol was the more accurate puncher of the two, I agree. He was the cleaner puncher and he was the more accurate puncher of the two. However, that being stated, just because you are the cleaner and sometimes the more accurate puncher within a fight doesn't always mean that you ended up winning the fight. And a certain amount of people are not really going to understand what I mean by that, because you can't just punch accurately and you just can't be the cleaner puncher in certain spots. You have to throw consistently. And at the end of the day, if you don't throw consistently and if you don't show throughout the whole entire round, in my personal view, that you're willing to do that, like say what a Mayweather was able to do against the Canelo Alvarez, or maybe what he was able to do against Manny Pacquiao or some other guys, or, if we want to compare it to another fighter that was on the back foot and outbox somebody, Liam Paro versus, Subriel Matias, whoever the hell else you want to compare it to. At the end of the day, you have to make it very clear. In my personal view, once again, a big part of the reason why this fight is so comparable between that of Canelo Alvarez versus Lara is because if you take a look back at that fight between Araceli Lara and Canelo Alvarez, if you want to talk about quote-unquote accuracy, Araceli Lara was the more accurate fighter between the two fighters within that fight. He was the fighter that was the more accurate fighter. He was the cleaner and the sharper puncher between the two. And when you talk about his power shots, he usually landed overall, at least at times, more impactful shots, or at least the cleaner shots. But the problem is that Lara, in my view, would make some of the rounds way, way, way too close, because in the first part of the round, or the first minute, or the first minute and a half, he would be very sharp and he would counterpunch Canelo Alvarez, but then he would let Canelo Alvarez trap him up against the ropes, overall, basically showing that he was starting to get to Lara, and that his ring generalship and that his body attack was starting to get to him. And the thing is that you can be accurate, but a fight is not just about the punches that are landed, and a certain amount of people don't understand this. It's also about how you look in the ring. And Dmitry Bivol was always going to be the fighter that was going to be more on the back foot within this fight. Artur Beterbiev is known as a bulldozer, so whenever he ends up pushing you forward, the judges already kind of have that in mind that, okay, Artur Beterbiev is starting to build up momentum. Is Dmitry Bivol hurt? What's going on here? And in my personal view, when it came down to it, I thought that Dmitry Bivol, after the first 4 rounds, I thought that he would do very good for the first minute to minute and a half. And I just think that he let Artur Beterbiev get off a little bit too much, or pretty much let him push him back without returning fire a little bit too much. And that's why I compare this fight to a Canelo Alvarez versus Lara, because there were so many rounds that could have potentially went either way in the Canelo versus Lara fight, because Lara once again would be the sharper and the more accurate puncher throughout a certain amount of those rounds. But then in the second half of that round, he would let Canelo Alvarez kind of trap him in a corner or up against the ropes and not return fire enough, and it would make it look like Canelo Alvarez's ring generalship and that Canelo Alvarez's body attack was starting to affect Lara, because people must understand, when you're throwing in the first part of that round, the first minute and the minute of a half, but then the other guy is pressuring you and he's getting off certain body shots and he's starting to push you back, and then you throw less, the judges are looking at it and saying, okay, why is he throwing less? It must be because that fighter is having a certain amount of level of success. So in my personal view, Dmitry Bivol, even though he was doing a lot of things right within this fight, he should have threw a little bit more and he should have had more volume within this fight, which I was going to question throughout this fight.
He got his respect. I felt like, he was throwing more punches and getting through more. It was certainly a tactical fight. It was certainly a fight that, you can see both guys had some moments. But even in the live, we had about 80%, probably more, that felt agreed with us and thought that Bivol won the fight. I don't know, man. I'm just starting to feel like, listen, judging has always been a problem in boxing, but it's getting to the point where it's it's not only corrupt, there's also ineptness and there's also corruption. So you can't really figure out which one it is all the time, you know? And a fight like this is real tight and you got to understand what's going on. You got to understand how to read the fight. It kind of exposes judges as, you know, not knowing what they're watching.
Right, but once again, this is just my personal view. I don't think that Dmitry Bivol ended up winning this fight. And I know a certain amount of people, once again, are going to disagree with me. Now, if you had Dmitry Bivol winning this fight, I would understand it. Because once again, I had Araceli Lara actually winning that Canelo Alvarez fight many, many years ago, all the way back in 2014. But rewatching the fight now, and overall having a little bit more knowledge, at least of how to personally score a fight, at least how I personally score fights, I take a look at that fight now and I say, you know what? I can understand why Canelo Alvarez ended up getting that fight. Now, 9 rounds to 3, in my view, was just absolutely asinine, in my personal view. Just like I thought the 8 rounds to 4 scorecard for Beterbiev overall was a little bit too wide. But what I will state is this. I'm not going to state that it's out of the realm of possibility. Because in my view, Dmitry Bivol, once again, I can remember the rounds that I scored for each and every single fighter, both times that I scored it. The first time that I scored this fight, I gave Dmitry Bivol the first round. I gave the second round to Artur Beterbiev. And then the third and the fourth rounds, I gave to Dmitry Bivol. And then every round from round 5, 6, 7, and 8, I gave to that of Artur Beterbiev because I thought that he was starting to turn it up. It looked like Dmitry Bivol was starting to retreat a little bit, and it looked like he wasn't throwing as much. So rounds 5 and 6, I gave to Artur Beterbiev. Round 7, in the beginning, it was Mr. Dmitry Bivol who was winning that round because he had pushed Artur Beterbiev back a little bit. But then for whatever reason, when he had Beterbiev up against the ropes, he was throwing a combination. It looked like Artur Beterbiev landed something because Bivol immediately started backing up. And then Beterbiev landed a couple things, and to be honest with you, it looked like Bivol's legs were a little bit wobbly. So a round that should have went to Dmitry Bivol more than likely and really would have helped him in the fight probably went to Artur Beterbiev just because of the last 30 seconds to 45 seconds of that round by Mr. Artur Beterbiev. And then the 8th round I gave to Artur Beterbiev. The 9th round I clearly gave to Dmitry Bivol. The 10th round I gave to Artur Beterbiev. I believe the 11th round I gave to Artur Beterbiev as well. And the 12th round, the first time I scored it, I gave to Dmitry Bivol. But after rewatching it a second time, the first 4 rounds I believe I gave to Dmitry Bivol. Maybe one of those rounds you could debate for Artur Beterbiev. And then, once again, I scored it the exact same way from rounds 5 to 8. I gave every single one of those rounds to Artur Beterbiev. Was he always the more accurate puncher of the two, at least to the head? No, he wasn't. But he was starting to throw more. He was starting to build up pressure. And his game plan was looking like it was working more than Dmitry Bivol's because his punch output was starting to decrease a little bit. And on top of that, it looked like in certain moments, like in round 7, like he was starting to get backed up more, starting to get hit a little bit more. And overall, like something had hurt him. So Dmitry Bivol, in my view, was losing those rounds. He clearly, in my view, just in my view, lost rounds 5 to 8. In my personal view, he lost all 4 of those rounds. In my personal view, at least the majority of them. So it is what it is. And then, of course, rewatching it, round 9, I gave the Bivol again. Round 10, I gave the Artur Beterbiev. And then round 11, I also gave the Artur Beterbiev. And then round 12, I gave the Artur Beterbiev because Bivol was doing very good in the first minute and a half of that round. But then Beterbiev came back. It looked like he had landed some very good body shots. And it looked like overall like he was starting to hurt Dmitry Bivol. And like there was almost certain times to where Bivol was almost about to get dropped in certain moments. Not that he was super wobbled or anything like that. But you could tell that Bivol was definitely on the retreat from the power. That's why, once again, in my view, even though a lot of people believe that Bivol won this fight, I don't believe that he did enough to win the fight. Now, if he did a little bit more, in my view, I would say, yes, Dmitry Bivol, in my view, deserved to win the fight. But in my personal view, Artur Beterbiev, the right man won.
I didn't think there was so much corruption in this because it's not like Beterbiev is this major political figure like a Canelo, for example, who you got to be careful when you fight him. You got to get robbed, It's not like that for Beterbiev nor Bivol. So if there was going to be a close fight and controversial, and probably just
Agreed. And Eastern European fighters are not guys that are ever, like a lot of these LDBC and new media channels like Paulie TV and Dante and all these other guys, they keep trying to make this bullshit claim about you got to be careful when you fight these Caucasian fighters because they have the complexion for the protection and, they'll rob you on the scorecards. There's never been an Eastern European fighter that is usually going to get the scorecards over that of an American fighter or that of a Black American fighter or a Latino American fighter. Examples are like Gennady Golovkin versus that of Canelo Alvarez. Examples are like that of Sergey the Crusher Kovalev and Andre SOG Ward. And there are other examples of this as well. Vasily Lomachenko versus Devin Haney. And whether you believe that those fighters won those fights or not, it's up to you. But at the end of the day, the point being is this narrative that these Eastern European fighters that, they're just going to have the edges on the judges' scorecards. No, they're not, because at the end of the day, they're not the ones that are going to be the main faces of boxing. And the judges realize that. The judges are also, the judges, they also are there for the A side and who's worth more money. At the end of the day, the Eastern European fighters, they have their place in boxing, but they're not ever going to be looked at usually as the main face of boxing. They don't take a look at Beterbiev or Dmitry Bivol or even Alexander Usyk as someone that's the main face of boxing. So when it comes to Eastern European fighters, especially against certain fighters that may be from the UK or from that of America, they're not usually going to get the edge over those fighters.
Down to the judges not knowing what they're doing, it's not the end of the world that Beterbiev gets the win, but it just didn't seem like he could get more than a draw in this fight,
Personally, in my view, this is just my view of the situation. I don't think Dmitry Bivol deserved any more than a draw within this fight. I thought that both times, once again, I thought that Beterbiev, I thought that he got the rest of the fight within that of the second half of the fight. Once again, certain people scored it for Dmitry Bivol. I would have to know how you scored rounds 5 through 8. I would also have to know how you scored that of the last 3 rounds. Because in my view, Beterbiev won 7 overall, of the last, I don't know how many rounds, probably of the last 8 rounds.
It really didn't. I saw that Bivol took round 11 off and maybe the beginning of 12, but if
Dmitry Bivol didn't just take round 11 off, Paulie, he took off round 10. That's when he really started to take it off. And that was a huge problem. He took that round completely off. Beterbiev had won that round. Then in round 11, it looked like it was an even better round for Artur Beterbiev. And then in round 12, at first Dmitry Bivol, in my view, was doing enough to win the round. But then he just let Artur Beterbiev come back a little bit too much. And, Dmitry Bivol was able to push Beterbiev back a little bit. I believe he landed a good right hand to the head. And then on top of that, a couple of great right hands to the body. But it just wasn't sustainable. He just didn't sustain it for very long. And then afterwards, Beterbiev actually hit him, I believe, with a good right hand or two, and then a good jab, and he actually hit Bivol to the body. And you could tell that Bivol was starting to feel that power, like he was hurt. So once again, or he was starting to feel it for sure. He was starting to feel the pressure. So once again, I gave Beterbiev that round.
He put punches together. Even in 12, I saw some things where, you got to close the fight strong. I thought Bivol won round 12. You know what I mean?
Well, when I first watched it, I thought that Bivol won round 12. But then when I rewatched it, I thought that Beterbiev clearly had more control. I thought that he hurt Bivol more than what Bivol hurt him. And I think what won out to Beterbiev this fight, in my personal view, was the pressure. And I also thought that it looked like at times like he hurt Bivol more than what Bivol hurt him. Now, was Bivol the sharper and the cleaner puncher in certain times in this fight? Absolutely. Just like what Lara was against Canelo Alvarez. But once again, you don't always win a fight just off of being the more accurate or the cleaner puncher at certain times within a fight. You also, once again, have to count damage. You also have to count that of the pressure and overall who seems to be better, whether they're on the back foot or the front foot. And if you are going to find on the back foot, that's a great thing. But at the end of the day, you have to show overall that you on the back foot, that it is clearly you being the visible aggressor and the good aggressor, the effective aggressor. And I just don't think that Dmitry Bivol was effective enough throughout a certain amount of these rounds, at least consistently throughout the whole entire round. I thought that he would do very good within the first half of the round, and then I thought that he would give the rest of the round away.
Bivol put together a bunch of punches in round 12 and did what he had to do. Then there was moments in certain rounds I felt Beterbiev was trying to steal them in the last 30 seconds when he didn't really do a lot in the beginning of the rounds. Again, it depends what you're watching. You're grasping onto things. But my biggest pet peeve with judging today is probably the rewarding of the playing of follow the leader inside the ring. Like it's a major pet peeve where judges that, and it's the majority of judges, mind you, just don't know how to judge a fight, don't know what the hell they're watching. We'll never learn how to watch a fight. We'll never understand the concept of boxing. So when they get a guy who's consistently going forward, they just give him the fight because it's simple.
Well, I someone agree with you, Mr. Paulie Malignaggi, that we cannot just give someone the fight just because they're going forward more than the other guy. But the problem is that Artur Beterbiev, when you talk about his style, he's known as a guy that is pretty much going to be a bulldozer. He's a guy that is going forward. Dmitry Bivol, of course, is a guy that's great on the back foot as well, but he's also a guy that can push you back a little bit more. Dmitry Bivol was actually able to push back Artur Beterbiev a little bit within the first part of the first 4 rounds. But then Beterbiev really started to get Dmitry Bivol on the run and really overall started to make him retreat a little bit, which I think that made the judges think, okay, Beterbiev's game plan is working. And on top of that, Bivol, even though he was the cleaner puncher at times, it's not like he was clearly outlanding Beterbiev by just such a great amount. And that's why I think Beterbiev ended up winning this fight.
Fies the matter for a less intelligent person, which that person must be. Because if you're judging a fight just on a plain follow the leader, you shouldn't be judging a fight. You have no clue what you're doing. You have no clue what you're watching.
I agree, a fight shouldn't just be based on that. The problem, however, is this. This was not a Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez situation. Or this was not a Mayweather versus Pacquiao situation where the guy going forward was not throwing as much overall as the guy, that was coming forward. And on top of that, he was clearly throughout the whole entire round, usually, landing the more clear and impactful shots. The problem is that Dmitry Bivol, in my view, he let Artur Beterbiev's ring generalship look better in certain moments within this fight, and he made his pressure look a little bit too dominant. And in terms of the damage, you would also have to argue that Artur Beterbiev did more damage throughout this fight.
A lot of nuances you're looking for in a fight, especially a fight like this where tactically,
at least I would argue that
both guys were battling for position. And neither guy was really breaking position almost the entire fight, They fought in their style, but the position of their style never really broke the entire fight, no matter what. I just felt that Bivol's better legs and being in and out and landing the cleaner shots, it made a difference. Now, some of you less intelligent ones out there is going to say, well, look how, Bivol's eye was damaged after the fight. Did you see it? Guys, you're going to judge a fight by damage, you gotta go watch something else. Boxing is not for you. It's not for you. It's never
right. But Mr. Paulie Malignaggi, at the end of the day, you do have to score a fight a little bit off of damage. Now, you don't score it completely off of damage. You don't take a look at a fight and just say, oh, that guy has the more swollen eye, so overall that guy, clearly must have lost the fight. No, you can't score a fight off of that. But at the end of the day, when you talk about, throughout the whole entire part of the fight about who damaged who more, well, let me ask you something for those of you that are wondering about how to score this fight. Who was hurt more throughout this fight? Was it Artur Beterbiev or was it Dmitry Bivol? Who was the one that was backing up, or who was the one that looked like they were more wobbled at times or more hurt or looked like they were about to be dropped more? I think that we would all have to debate that more than likely it was Dmitry Bivol. He was hurt clearly in the 7th round. He backed up Artur Beterbiev and hurt him a little bit, it looked like, in round 7. But then for whatever reason, I don't know what ended up happening, but it looked like he ran into something there during mid-combination, and then the final 45 to 30 seconds around 7, he had Dmitry Bivol, and to be quite honest with you, he looked like he had him a little bit wobbly and hurt pretty bad. So I had to give the Artur Beterbiev that round, and then round 11, it looked like Dmitry Bivol was hurt pretty badly, and then the second part of round 12, it looked like he also once again was hurt pretty badly. So when you talk about damage throughout a fight, yes, that is something that you're going to have to count. You have to count ring generalship, you have to count damage, you have to count, who is the more effective aggressor, whether it be on the back foot or the front foot. And when you talk about those categories, and of course, who was the cleaner puncher, who was, landing, the heavier and the more impactful shots. When you talk about landing the more impactful shots, at least the clear ones, the sharper punches, in my view, Bivol gets that edge. But when you talk about the ring generalship throughout the majority of the rounds and the game plan, and when you talk about the damage, in my view, that went to Artur Beterbiev.
Going to be for you. Of course, Beterbiev is a harder puncher, so naturally the punches land when he lands them, and both guys are going to land. They're going to show a little bit more. Also, Bivol has high cheekbones, so his eyes going to close much more rapidly. You got to keep all these things in mind. Not that I assume most people that watch this channel are not that intelligent. I think the people that watch this channel are probably more the hardcore boxing fans. And if you're watching about this fight, you're a true boxing fan, because this wasn't one of those casual attracting fights that will attract those blowhards. So I think when I talk about this, I think I'm getting the higher IQ part of the fan base here, and like I said, my biggest pet peeve, one of my biggest pet peeves is judges that just reward following the leader. You follow the leader, you go forward, and the other guy goes backwards. And whoever's coming forward, doesn't matter what's going on in the fight, doesn't matter how the fight's playing out, just give the guy going forward the fight. It's a major pet peeve, major pet peeve. And I've felt that a lot of guys get robbed in situations like this, because what they're doing can't be appreciated. And a lot of times the guy coming forward is very ineffective, you know? I felt like in this fight, there were moments where Beterbiev was effective, but I thought Bivol was more effective overall in what he was doing.
I personally do not. Once again, in my view, I thought that Beterbiev was the more effective fighter of the two, especially within the second half of the fight. I thought that Bivol clearly was more effective than the first part. I thought that he was more effective within the first 4 rounds, if not winning every single round within the first 4 rounds. But then when you talk about after that, round 5 onwards, I thought that Beterbiev was more effective and did more damage and overall had the better ring generalship than either one of the fighters. Dmitry Bivol, of course, had great lateral movement. He had great movement, and I thought that he did a lot throughout this fight very, very well. But he needed to fight a perfect fight in order to fight Artur Beterbiev or beat him, and he just didn't do it.
To go along with this pet peeve, and I'm not going to say I saw it in this fight, but I can't. You know what I can't stand too? When you're looking at a fight and there's a close-up angle camera, and the judge is like looking under the ropes, like he's looking for little subtleties, little nuances, as if he's going to understand what he's watching anyway. You know what I mean? Like you know when they put there, you ever see the judge like put his head under the ropes, like when the fighter's right on top of him, and he's like you know you're. Like he's really, really looking for the subtleties and the nuances, as if he's gonna understand them anyway, even if he sees anything. You know what I'm saying? Like it's one of those pet peeves because then these guys put in these scorecards and you're just like, what was that? What was that? What are we talking about here? You know? So, you know, I can go on and on about my complaints about this. Listen, it wasn't the most exciting fight, but it was a good tactical fight.
Well, a lot of the times when you take a look at certain fights that are between two top 10 level pound for pound fighters, a lot of the times they aren't always the most exciting fights in the world. When you take a look once again at Mayweather versus Pacquiao, that was not a fight that was looked at as super duper exciting. You know, when you take a look overall, you know, at Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo, the first fighter on, I mean, that was a relatively entertaining fight, but it wasn't really quite as exciting, you know, overall as what a lot of people personally thought that it was going to be. Now, the second fight, in my view, was a bit better. You know, when you talk about this fight, of course, it was another thing like that. Usyk versus Tyson Fury. That was a relatively exciting fight, but it's not like it was fight of the year or anything like that in my personal view. You know, so once again, you know, when you talk about two fighters that are great at their abilities and great at their craft and great at boxing, you know, it's going to look like this sometimes.
Between two very, very high level guys. So it was a boxing historians fight. It was a boxing high IQ boxing fight. So that's why the casuals probably wouldn't really appreciate this fight. It wouldn't really know how to appreciate this fight. And probably, I'd say, I was saying after the fight with Chris, while I was watching it with Chris Algieri, we're looking at each other like, you know, probably no need for a rematch. It wasn't the most exciting fight, but it's pretty clear that Bivol won.
I would love to see a rematch between these two fighters because there's a lot of debate about who won this fight. In my view, it was Artur Beterbiev. But if you did score for Dmitry Bivol, I could see why. Because he was the cleaner puncher in certain spots. And of course, you know, he had great lateral movement and he was able to do some very, very good things. I would love to see a rematch between these two fighters. I would bet on Artur Beterbiev to win again more than likely. Now, of course, I'm not really a betting man. I don't ever bet money or anything like that usually. But, you know, of course, you know, figure of speech and, you know, speaking terms, I would bet on Artur Beterbiev, you know, to win the fight again. I would predict for him to win again. And to probably even have more confidence within that of the rematch. Once again, the reasons why I picked Artur Beterbiev to win this fight was because I thought that Bivol at times was not going to tie up Artur Beterbiev at certain times when he needed to, and that at times he was going to be a little bit more tentative to throw than what Artur Beterbiev was, at least going up against the ropes and staying up against the ropes a little bit too long. And in my view, all those things did come to light, and on top of that, Beterbiev has a better body attack, which ended up, in my view, causing Dmitry Bivol to back up a couple of times within this fight and ended up being a little bit hurt up against the ropes.
Fight, you know? Generally, it's pretty clear. It wasn't like it was competitive, but it was pretty clear. So it was one of those fights where, okay, you're probably not going to need a rematch. And then they gave the fight to Beterbiev, dude. Like, you can't ever get it right in boxing, can you? You can't ever get it right. Again.
Well, in my personal view, it did go to the right man, but it is what it is. You know, once again, great fight. But if Dmitry Bivol wanted to win this fight, he was going to have to push Artur Beterbiev back, and he was really going to have to hurt Artur Beterbiev. Dmitry Bivol, in order to win a fight against Artur Beterbiev, in order to win a fight against Beterbiev in the first place, you cannot let a fighter like that pressure you throughout the whole entire second half of the fight. You're going to have to push him back. At the end of the day, Dmitry Bivol, if he wanted to look like the actual winner within this fight, he needed to push him back, and he really needed to hurt Beterbiev and really overall not let Beterbiev walk him down throughout the whole entire fight, or at least overall look like he was more hurt throughout the second half of the fight. Bivol really needed to throw sometimes a little bit more within some of these exchanges. I thought that Bivol did a great job in certain moments of the fight, but in my view, he didn't dare enough to be great. And I know that a certain amount of people are not going to agree with me on that. I thought within the first 4 rounds that he did very good, but I thought the second half of the fight that he definitely could have threw a lot more. And there were certain rounds in my view, especially within those final 4 rounds, to where he kind of took off a little bit, that I thought really cost him the fight.
I'm not saying it's the biggest travesty and whatnot, but Dmitry Bivol won this fight, guys. I mean, it's the
Well, no, he didn't. But it is what it is. In my view, the judges got it right.
same thing over and over and over again we're talking about here, and follow the leader.
And all, the fights recently that have happened in terms of the scorecards, I thought that they all have pretty much been correct when you talk about all the quote-unquote big fights that have happened as of recent. Canelo versus Munguia, even though there was even some people that debated that Munguia won that fight. I don't know how, but it is what it is, Madrimov versus Crawford, which was a very decent fight. I thought that Crawford won that fight 7 rounds to 5, but it was a very, very close fight. Usyk versus Tyson Fury. I thought that Usyk clearly won about 7 rounds to 5 at the very least, if not 8 rounds to 4. Although one judge did end up giving it to Tyson Fury. I did not think that he won that fight. And of course there's a couple of other fights that maybe I'm not thinking of. In my view, Artur Beterbiev also was the right man to win.
Was rewarded, essentially. The guy coming forward, even if no matter how ineffective he may have been at times. Yes, I understand Beterbiev was effective. Both guys, the fight wasn't a blowout. It was a competitive fight. But come on, man. I mean, I don't know. Yes, I understand Beterbiev was effective. Both guys, the fight wasn't a blowout. It was a competitive fight. But come on, man. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, man. If I could only figure it out myself, but I don't know what to tell you. Let me not use fat.
Well, I know what to tell you, Mr. Paulie Malignaggi. You're not once again judging the damage that Artur Beterbiev was able to do against Dmitry Bivol in some of those rounds, and the way that he made him look backing up overall throughout some of the second half of those rounds, and hitting him with some of those jabs to the body and also to the head, and also with the right hand. That's what you're missing, Mr. Paulie Malignaggi.
Let me know how you guys all scored it. I told you right after the fight, we felt like most of the fan base on the chat that I was on was scoring it indeed for Bivol. But as now time passes, when the quarterbacks have come out, and I've seen more people that went for are saying, "Oh, Beterbiev did win the fight." I'm wondering how just just taking the temperature of the you guys here at Paulie TV. How'd you score the fight? Do you want to see a rematch? Should there be a rematch? I mean, at this point, I think the fight was controversial now. So I'd like to see a rematch. I think people deserve.
In my view, this fight was way too competitive in certain spots for it to be quote-unquote controversial. When you talk about a fight or a scorecard that was quote-unquote controversial, in my view, that would have been like if Tyson Fury would have won the Alexander Usyk fight. Now, that, in my view, would have been controversial. Because Tyson Fury, in my view, clearly lost the first 3 rounds of that Alexander Usyk fight, and he lost some of the latter rounds. So that would have been quote-unquote controversial, especially with Alexander Usyk getting a knockdown within that fight, or a counted knockdown against that of Tyson Fury. So once again, that would have been a quote-unquote controversial decision. But when you talk about this fight right here, no.
A rematch. Dude, at this point, making a Russia, because obviously not even in the Middle East are we always secure from bad decisions. It's everywhere you go. These 2 guys are Russian anyway. Just make the fight in Russia, better off. Anyway, guys, I'm Paulie Malignaggi. This is Paulie TV, and I'm sick and tired of complaining about this. So let's just talk about the tactics of the fight, and let me know who you think won the fight and why. Don't tell me it's because one guy had more bruises, please, or one guy came forward. You gotta explain how he won, if you thought he won, or why you think Bivol won if you thought he won. I'm Paulie Malignaggi. Again, it's Paulie TV. I'll see you next time.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for that little video. But anyways, just to answer Mr. Paulie Malignaggi's question, why do I believe I think Artur Beterbiev won the fight? I think that Dmitry Bivol debatably won the first 4 rounds of the fight. I thought that he clearly was landing more. On top of that, Beterbiev was not able to pressure as much because he was being pushed back by Bivol. But Bivol, on top of that, was clearly throwing more and landing the more impactful punches. However, when you talk about rounds 5 through 8, I thought that Beterbiev won every single one of those rounds. He was starting to pressure a little bit more. The jab to the body was starting to get to him more. The right hand at times was landing. And on top of that, the right hand to the body was starting to land a little bit as well. And it was clear that Bivol, that he was starting to get a little bit more tentative to throw. In my view, he gave up a little bit too many rounds. He would look good in the first part of the round, but in my view, in the final part of the round, which a lot of the times the judges are going to take a look at as the most important part of the fight, or the most important part of the round, which is the final part of the round, because you get the final say, basically, of your game plan and your ring generalship. Artur Beterbiev a lot of the times would end the round as the stronger opponent. And then once again, when you talk about the damage, not only was Bivol's face a little bit more bruised up than Artur Beterbiev's, but on top of that, there was multiple times to where you could tell that Dmitry Bivol was up against the ropes and he was not liking the body work nor the punches that was coming his way. There was about one time I think that Beterbiev, I think, was legitimately hurt against that of Dmitry Bivol within this fight, probably within that of the 7th round. And then, interestingly enough, Artur Beterbiev also hurt Dmitry Bivol back, it appeared, at the end of that 7th round and actually wobbled him, at least to a certain degree, or had him on a little bit of unsteady legs. Not super clearly, but clearly it looked like Bivol was affected in that he was getting hurt at the end part of that round. So once again, what that round was kind of comparable to was that of Andrade versus Benavidez in the 3rd round, where Andrade, he had all the momentum in the first 2 minutes, but then David Benavidez hurt him really badly, or it appeared like he was starting to hurt him really badly at the end of that round, so you could give Benavidez that round. Then 9th round, I gave the Bivol. That was the best round that he had throughout the second half of the fight, clearly. He clearly won that round. And then rounds 10, 11, and 12, I gave the Mr. Artur Beterbiev, in my personal view. When you talk about, once again, the cleaner punching, when you talk about the more accurate punching, yes, it went to Dmitry Bivol. But when you talk about damage, ring generalship, and on top of that, effective pressure and effective game plan, in my view, that all went to Artur Beterbiev. And that's the reason why he won the fight. But that's pretty much the reason why I thought that Artur Beterbiev won the fight. I just thought that I would talk about that. I thought that Paulie brought up some very interesting points. But that's the reason why I thought that Artur Beterbiev won the fight. Now, if you had Dmitry Bivol winning, I completely understand. Extremely close fight. But in my personal view, the right man ended up winning the fight. And I did predict Artur Beterbiev to win because of some of the factors that I mentioned. But I would love to see a rematch between these two fighters because I think that both of these fighters are fantastic. And I think that they would have to make some slight adjustments, both of them going into this fight. But especially Bivol, he would have to really be a little bit more active throughout this fight in order to win this fight, at least on the scorecards, because Beterbiev is always going to have a slight edge throughout some of the judges because, when you talk about his level of style, he's always going to be looked at as a freight train. So if he's coming forward, he's going to be looked at as being somewhat successful. And on top of that, he was starting to land a certain amount of the punches on the arms, and on top of that, the body to Dmitry Bivol. And it clearly was affecting Dmitry Bivol throughout the second half of that fight. It made him throw less, and at times, clearly, he was retreating up against the ropes, and he was not liking the power that was coming his way. But it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. And once again, to talk about it, Beterbiev right now does have to be within, at the very least, the top 5 pound for pound. Not even a discussion. Like I said, the top 5 pound for pound fighters right now, and in my view, it's really not even a debate. You're talking about Usyk, Crawford, Inoue, Artur Beterbiev, and Canelo Alvarez. Those are the top 5 pound for pound fighters. Whichever order you want to put them in is whatever order you want to put them in. But in my view, those are the undisputed, locked top 5 pound for pound fighters. In my view, it's really not even a debate. Now, when you talk about other fighters like Haney and Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson and maybe Teofimo Lopez, Junto Nakatani, Dmitry Bivol now, of course, and some of the other guys, those guys are great fighters, but in my view, they cannot be quite on the same level as those guys within the top 5 pound for pound. So it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I thought that I would talk about that. Very interesting fight. Very great fight. I would love to see a rematch between these fighters. But in my view, Bivol would have to do a little bit more within the rematch. And Beterbiev, he might have to do certain things as well. Because it's not like he had the perfect fight either. But very great fight. Very great technical fight between two great Soviet and Russian fighters and two great fighters of this era. Two of the top 10 pound for pound fighters of this era when it came down to it, or at least of right now. Great fight. Great fight. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see what happens. I'm also going to watch this fight a couple more times to potentially see if I scored any differently. But I thought that Artur Beterbiev won both times I watched it. is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.